Sweet. Hey everyone, thank you all so much for joining us today and tuning into our fourth of 5 webinars, part of our winter webinar series. I'm going to start by introducing Alvin, Oki Alvin. Alvin, first rider, is an environmental manager for the Blood Tribe Land Management Team, and he will be sharing his work and insights from Canada Nations Fire Guardians program and how they're introducing cultural burning practices to improve grassland health and reduce invasive plant fuel loads. Today, Blood Tribe is leading efforts to bring good fire back to the landscape, and their work is as Canada's first ever Fire Guardian program, and they're working to rekindle traditional knowledge to restore the land. So welcome, Alvin. I'm going to end my slide, stop sharing, and I'll pass things on to you.
Hello everybody. Okay, gusto ko natin na Saxon. Alvin Firstrider. I work with Blood Tribe Land Management as our Environment Protection Manager. I've been in this capacity for the past year. Previously, I was our environmental technician, and we did we do various environmental health assessments like riparian health, range health, and different type of wildlife surveys, migratory bird surveys, to assist with our management techniques. So today I'm here to talk about just how we utilize fire to kind of manipulate our ecosystems and how fire kind of shaped this land and how it evolved. Our ecosystems evolved with fire, and the lack of fire has kind of created these conditions that we see today. So yeah, since the beginning of time in our time as Blackfoot people, fire has always played an integral role in how we how the earth has been shaped. There are many oral stories that have been passed on how fire has shaped the earth, and then how we utilize fire throughout the generations and how we continue to utilize it today. So these type of ecosystems have been shaped by fire, and due to the lack of fire, we're seeing a lot of unbalanced ecosystems that are creating like catastrophic conditions that people are observing. So our management techniques are based on kinship relationships. So how we view the earth, the air, the water, fire, and spiritual values, and how all those kind of relate to our cultural and then our personal relationships. And through that, we utilize Blackfoot ecological knowledge to help manage our kin within the blood reserve. So from a fire historical uses, like I mentioned, we manipulated our ecosystems to help us thrive on the landscape, whether that was for uh, vegetation growth to attract animals or for uses such as foods. There's been documentations and studies after a burn or a fire. A lot of the edible and medicinal plants become more nutritious, or they come back more healthier, more abundant, and they grow back thicker. So just that evidence shows that these ecosystems and plants have evolved with fire, and due to the lack of fire, we're starting to see a decrease in them and an increase in invasive species. So we're trying to reintroduce that historical fire cycle that we used to have on the landscape based on Blackfoot seasonal rounds. Some other interesting things that we used fire were for warfare, but also safeguarding our campsites, and then fireproofing different type of materials, and then just that like smoke signals and pest control. So fire, smoke played a huge part in how people communicated, and I like to reference Lord of the Rings when they kind of light the beacons and kind of when they're going to war, and that's kind of similar to how we uh, would kind of get messages across to people throughout the landscape. So, like I mentioned, fire has been a part of the earth since the beginning of time, and how we used to carry fire was through um, buffalo horns. So at one time, all the Blackfoot Confederacy nations carried the same fire, and due to colonial practices, we that fire got extinguished, and they removed fire, they removed indigenous people, and they removed bison, three huge keystone species that help shape these lands off the land and put them into small little islands. And through that, um, we've got monocultures and invasive species that just have been able to thrive due to the suppression of indigenous-led management techniques on the land. So we're trying to reignite this type of carrying system so we could utilize in our cultural burns, and then just to pass that generational knowledge and then reignite the relationship historically that we had with fire on the landscape. Another thing that kind of helped with that, I guess, like the signing of treaties and the settling of the land, if you will, was that romanticized fable that this land was untamed, and uh, it was like virgin land, and that was not the case. Like I mentioned, we utilize fire to shape these ecosystems, and there's evidence in charcoal layers above uh, buffalo jumps that prove that. And then there's also just our oral knowledge that how we shape these landscapes. And with that, there's people believed that they were coming to a land that was uh well, they looked at it as an oasis, and that was because of how indigenous people shape these lands, whether it's on the East Coast or on the West Coast or uh, in the central areas. Indigenous people helped shape these landscapes, and um, this type of lie, if you will, this kind of created these conditions that we have today. So, kind of how we, like I mentioned, we utilize Western science and Western evidence and to help shape that narrative of how fire shaped these landscapes. And one of the projects that help with that is the Mountain Legacy Project, and it goes back and compares photos from over 100 years ago to today, what those landscapes look like. And a lot of the areas, especially like in the Waterton area of southern Alberta, a lot of those areas were maintained by fire, and um, they were grasslands, and they kind of controlled that aspen encroachment that we see today. And it created that conditions for uh, the Keenau fire that we seen. And we're getting these stands of trees that are just unnatural and have really detrimental impacts um, on the population today. So utilizing this Mountain Legacy Project, it helps create that narrative of reestablishing that fire cycle in those areas and trying to get at least that relationship in people seeing fire as a good thing instead of looking at it as something so negative. Uh, a lot of a lot of propaganda has gone to against fire, and we're trying to do away with that type of propaganda, such as Smokey the Bear, and just other type of belief systems. Uh, Indigenous people, they've been influenced by residential schools or boarding schools, and that was heavily the Catholicism was heavily influenced, and with that, people view fire with that evilness of hell, or so we're trying to recreate that, or educate people on how fire is not so evil or not so bad. So yeah, this we historically manipulated our grasslands to help us thrive on this landscape and help us um, help our kin as well. After we would burn, a lot of the animals, birds, insects would be attracted to those burn areas depending on the season we burnt. Um, and paying attention to different indicators of those burn cycles, um, the specific windows that we would burn in, so we wouldn't harm the ecosystem, and we would allow it to actually thrive. Um, to where now we're getting fires that are burning in the summer that are really detrimental to our ecosystem. So we're really trying to educate people on recognizing indicators on when to burn, such as when bees are active, or when birds are starting to nest, or um, when things are starting to go dormant, when birds start to migrate back for their fall migration. So paying attention to small indicators like that allow us to burn and not be harmful. So yeah, this is just some evidence on how we manipulated the ecosystems and how people once witnessed a thriving ecosystem that was very diverse, very abundant with different different elemental creatures, different um, yeah, living beings on the landscape, plants, animals, and due to that suppression, we don't get to see that. But after we do burns, um, we get to see those ecosystems kind of reinvigorate and kind of thrive again. So yeah, just some timeline on fire suppression was just treaties and Indian policy really kind of help the settling of this land and help industry get on this landscape. Our grasslands have been cultivated, and um, different type of settlements were established in areas that were um, fire tolerant ecosystems. And then there was that huge propaganda of fire suppression and put out the fires, and that that allowed these mountain ecosystems to become overgrown with trees. And after 100 years of fire suppression, we're getting these ecosystems that are unhealthy and unbalanced. So we're trying to at the current contemporary days, we're trying to reintroduce fire into those ecosystems that have been lacking fire. So yeah, this when we do um, go out on the land and we put fire to the landscape, one of the most important things is going out on the land and walking the land and looking at what's occurring on the landscape, determining where you're going to burn and what type of resources are there. Do you have water? What the lay of the land is? What type of natural fire breaks are there? We're not trying to dig up land or um, create man-made fire breaks. We try to utilize what's on the landscape so we could do our burns, whether they're small 1 acre burns or they're 100 acre burns, determining the area by getting out on the landscape is really important. Walking the land with elders, um, and then just paying attention to those indicators, like I mentioned. Present day, like we really have to consider who's our neighbor and educating them on why we're using fire, that they don't have to be afraid of it, and that um, if there is smoke or a different type of concerns that they have, that it'll be minimal and uh, almost instantaneously. Like our burns, they happen like in a few hours at most, but most of our burns like we could do in like an hour or so. So like the smoke concern or different type of concerns that people have, like we just need to continue to educate them um on what we're doing, and that we know how to properly burn. Another big thing is just that insurance piece. A lot of people bring that up, so we're trying to mimic what they do in California. Um, like we're right at the ground, trying to build what they have done in California, where they do have an insurance that the state of California will insure cultural practitioners that burn on the landscape and provide that safeguard for people, if a fire was to jump their line or get out of their boundaries. So we're trying to build that and replicate what they have done in California in into Alberta, into Canada. Uh, Endangered Species Act, like considering that, so walking the line, making sure that we're um, not impacting them, although a lot of burns would help actually benefit certain species. So just paying attention to those windows is really important. And then invasive induced introduced species. So how are they interacting with fire? How are they responding with fire? Um, they may need a more intense burn, and then we may need to burn more often. So, like I mentioned, we burn seasonally. Um, like we may have to burn multiple times a year versus historically we would just burn that like in the spring or fall. But with invasive species, because of how they respond to certain disturbances and their threats, they'll send up multiple shoots after a burn, so that's their just emergency response, that they're threatened, and um, getting fire and burning them again is really beneficial to help just continue to stress them out so that we could create that growing space for native species. Our Fire Guardians program, like was mentioned, is the first in Canada. We're continually building that capacity of getting a crew that's readily available to hit those windows. When we first started doing burns on the landscape, 2021, there was myself and a few other Blood Tribe land staff that would do burns, but not enough to where we could go out and burn in those windows, or we would miss those windows just because of uh, seasonal employment or whatnot. So we have our fire guardians that are employed year round to be able to hit those windows and burn um, throughout the spring and fall seasons when we need it. In our timber limit areas near Waterton Parks, accessibility in the springtime, just because we're still waiting for the road to get open. Uh, we'll miss that window to burn in that area. So um, creating that capacity and building up the Fire Guardians program, whether that's getting equipment, personnel, or just the training, I guess, to do these type of burns, has really been instrumental in getting fire back on the landscape. This past winter, we've been able to accomplish 7 burns, small burns in our grassland areas and in our timber limits in our riparian areas. So that's really been helpful in getting fire back on the landscape, and then just showing people the good that fire can could achieve. So um, as we do more burns and collect more data, we'll continue to share ho- our progress in our Fire Guardians program. And then, yeah, just in summary, just utilizing indigenous land management techniques or indigenous ecological knowledge to help manage the landscape is really important. Being able to walk in those two worlds or two-eyed seeing, utilizing Western science and Blackfoot ecological knowledge is giving us a different lens on how to manage our landscape instead of just looking at it from a single specialized lens of like say range health. We're looking at it from a more holistic viewpoint and how could we utilize fire? How could we utilize coexistence with beavers or to help manage our landscapes more? Or how could we utilize bison and get them interacting with these ecosystems that haven't had that interaction? So utilizing those uh, oral history and oral Blackfoot ecological knowledge has really um, helped our land management in ways that we haven't seen in the past. Like we have range health data that goes back to the early 2000s, and after we seen bison and fire back on the landscape, we started to see more diverse plant communities. We started to see a shift in how our health scores were coming back. A lot of our plant scores were either uh, unhealthy or healthy with problems, and now we're seeing healthy range health scores just due to the bison and fire being back on the landscape. So creating that holistic management for a balanced ecosystem has really assisted our management objectives. And then just some other things that we've done is just we do beaver mimicry to help store water on the landscape and then to help with our culturally significant species. So we do sweat lodges and we use sweetgrass and others culturally significant species, and we've seen a decrease in those. So trying to utilize um, different type of willow stakings or plant plugs or after our burns is help kind of our cultural way of life. And then we've done some water quality stuff with bull trout and then just that bison reintroductions as well. So really trying to re-establish that seasonal round relationship that Blackfoot people had on the landscape. Thanks.
Awesome. Good job. And that's really great work. Um, really awesome stuff you guys are doing. We were talking before we had this wildfire conference, virtual wildfire conference last year. And a big outcome of that was the need and interest in alternative management strategies, and cultural burning came up multiple times. And I was doing like research recently and came across this video, and because of the fire suppression activities of the past, like that's why ticks are also being way more frequent and increasing in abundance, is because they like the cool, shaded environments of forests. And because we've just been suppressing fires, these forests have been able to spread into areas that were previously like prairies, things like that. So yeah, it's something I didn't even consider. But ticks, everyone hates ticks. So awesome. Thanks so much. We'll take questions at the end. We'll group them all for our speakers at the end. Okay, awesome. So thanks so much, Alvin. Our next speaker, Annie Aaron. So Aaron Jones will be presenting on invasive sea lamprey management with the Garden River First Nation. So Aaron Jones is an Anishinaabe community member of Garden River First Nation and team lead of the Guardian Unit at Garden River First Nation's Lands and Resource Department. He holds a natural environmental technology diploma from Sioux College and a Bachelor of Geography from Algoma University. He brings both professional expertise and personal experience as a harvester and subsistence fisherman to his work in Indigenous-led stewardship. Miigwech Alvin, so much for joining us and speaking with us. I'll stop sharing my screen and pass things on to you.
Ani bonjour, everyone. Miigwech, Chris, for that introduction. Miigwech to Alvin, too, for sharing your stories and some of the work that you're doing. It sounds really really interesting, really good. We're also going to try to do some Mishkode and firework over here in Garden River First Nation. But today I'm going to be talking to everyone about Garden River's work with invasive sea lamprey. And let me just get my screen sharing here. Okay. All right. Yeah, so miigwech everyone. Aaron Jones, Indigenous Kitagon Ziibi and Donjaba. My name is Aaron Jones. I'm from Garden River First Nation. Today I'm going to be talking about sea lamprey management in Garden River, a brief history of cultural impacts, and a path towards environmental reconciliation. So I'll be talking a little bit about an intro into sea lamprey and sea lamprey management techniques, some of the history of a river that we're going to be speaking about, Paswe'a Ziibi, the Upper Echo River. Talk about sea lamprey and Namay, which are lake sturgeon, the impacts of a sea lamprey barrier dam, and a path towards environmental reconciliation, which environmental reconciliation is addressing historic and ongoing harms to the physical and cultural environment, often damaged by government or industry. Oh, also too, this is my cat Min. She's going to be co-presenting with me today. Yeah, Chris already mentioned all this, so I'll just skip this introduction. You did a good job there, Chris. Miigwech. History of Paswe'a Ziibi, the Upper Echo River. It's a small, medium-sized river located next to the Garden River First Nation Reserve, which we're located just in between just alongside the shores of the St. Mary's River, next to Sault Ste. Marie. This river had particular importance for our community because our Garden River ancestors would conduct yearly harvesting traditions and ceremonies here alongside this river, and the spring harvests were essential for survival and cultural continuity, especially the walleye, sucker, and lake sturgeon runs that would occur in the late spring months. This river was once a part of the original 1850 Garden River First Nation Reserve boundaries, but only partly remains within our modern boundaries today. We've had almost 2/3 of our reserve been taken from us since the establishment of that 1850 treaty. And invasive sea lamprey invaded this area around the early to mid 1900s. So what are sea lamprey? They're an invasive species that are native to the Atlantic Ocean, but they can survive full year-round in freshwater. They invaded the Great Lakes in the early 1900s. They are a parasitic fish that feed off of other living fish, which makes them really destructive to our environment. Most fish do not survive sea lamprey attacks. So sea lamprey will use that kind of suction cup mouth there you see on the right, and they'll suction onto a fish, and they'll essentially just drink its blood until they're either full or the fish dies. These invasive sea lamprey are the cause of, or one of the main causes of the collapse of the Great Lakes fisheries in the mid 1900s. And the government has two main methods of control for them, lampricides and barrier dams, which we're going to be focusing on barrier dams today. I also want to talk a little bit about Namay, lake sturgeon. So they're a threatened native fish in the Great Lakes. Canadian government has labeled this population as threatened. The Ontario government has labeled this population as endangered. They're species at risk mainly due to loss of habitat, mostly from dams and industry. Very old living species of fish that can live over 100 years old. To be over 100 years old and get bigger than 6 feet. They're culturally important species, and our people have relied on them for food, tools, ceremonies, teachings, clan systems. Being a part of our clan system, they share teachings of wisdom, medicine, and the importance of Nabi, which is water in Anishinaabe-Mowen. I have a timeline as well, paralleling Alvin's presentation. So this is Echo Lake down here, and this is where that barrier dam was installed. So before 1850, when the treaties were signed for this area, the Anishinaabe and Garden River community conducted harvest and ceremonies for multiple generations. In the mid 1900s, that's when sea lamprey invaded Lake Huron, which is connected to this water body. And I found old government reports from the mid 1960s that said there's a very productive walleye fishery within Echo Lake, which coincides with our community's oral knowledge of there used to be a very productive walleye fishery in this specific lake. In 1971, the DFO installed an experimental sea lamprey barrier dam that was meant to stop invasive sea lamprey from spawning in the upper Echo River, but that also reduced access to native fish as well. So this dam helped to reduce the population of invasive sea lamprey, but also it impacts to the native fisheries. So from 1971 to present day, there's been a decline in the local walleye population of Echo Lake and the surrounding areas. In 1998, there was a fall walleye index net survey that was done in Echo Lake that showed that the walleye population was stressed and unstable. In 2007, the same fall walleye index netting was done, and that time the walleye population was classified as unhealthy and collapsed. In 2008, the Ontario government labeled the Echo River lake sturgeon as extirpated, meaning it no longer exists there. It couldn't get to its spawning grounds there, and we haven't seen lake sturgeon in this specific water body for multiple decades now. And then just 2 years ago, my team and the MNRF conducted a broad-scale fisheries assessment, which also showed that the walleye population in Echo Lake wasn't doing the best. And just last year, there's also a lamprey treatment that happened upstream of the dam, because occasionally sea lamprey do get above the dam and have successful spawns. Speaking of cultural impacts for Garden River First Nation regarding this sea lamprey barrier dam, once this barrier dam was built, Garden River yearly harvesting traditions and ceremonies ceased to exist because the native fish could no longer get past this dam. And when the fish were gone, our community could not practice our harvesting traditions for something that no longer existed, and we couldn't conduct our ceremonies because there was no reason to have those ceremonies once the fish were gone. This has led to multi-generational harms of cultural continuity, and there has been now generations of Garden River community members that have not experienced the harvesting traditions and ceremonies on this river because of this dam. This has led to a reduction in community food sovereignty. Not only was there a loss of those spring harvests, but those spring fish runs would also bring more fish downstream. Like all the fish would lay eggs in the springtime. Those eggs would hatch and then increase the fish population downstream. That hasn't happened for a number of years. It's also led to increased harassment and discrimination. Some of the non-Indigenous sport fishing population has seen the declines in the walleye population and blamed Garden River community members for those declines, even though those fisheries declines were not the fault of our traditional harvesting practices. And despite multiple dam upgrades, the latest being in 2019, there's never been adequate consultation for this dam. So the restoration project, Paswe'a Ziibi Restoration Project, the main goal here is to restore fish passage to this river. We want to find a way that is technically feasible, cost-effective, culturally appropriate, and data-informed. There are a number of different options that we want to look into for increasing fish passage. Those would include barrier dam modification, dam relocation or dam removal, as well as trap and sort methods for increasing fish passage, nature like fish dams, seasonal barriers, and supplemental sea lamprey control methods. These restoration options will be informed by whether or not the restoration option meets the project goals and objectives. Will be informed by community knowledge from Garden River First Nation, Indigenous knowledge, and traditional ecological knowledge, past reports from Garden River First Nation as well as the government, and proposed collaborative fisheries assessments. We're planning on doing a number of different assessments, including acoustic fish tagging, mark recapture studies, spawning assessments, hydrological surveys, and sea lamprey assessments. My team wants to conduct a two-eyed seeing review of a lot of this very technical documentation to be able to provide plain language summaries to our community and to our leadership to ensure that the community is involved with this project and with the decision-making process of how we want to see this river restored for the future. And the estimated timeline for a lot of these assessments and for the finalization of a plan of how to restore this river is going to take an estimated 3 to 5 years. So a path towards environmental reconciliation. We want to the increase of fish passage will have many benefits to local ecology and to the Garden River First Nation community and the surrounding fishery, the surrounding communities. This includes improved access to spawning habitat for those native fish, restoration of the local walleye fishery. Once we get walleye spawning in this river again, we hope that that will bring back that will increase the downstream population of walleye. We would like to do a lake sturgeon reintroduction, making sure that that establishing this aquatic connectivity is going to be suitable enough that lake sturgeon can get back into this river. And this also supports other aquatic species at risk that we have around here, such as native freshwater lamprey. We really want to ensure quality invasive species management here. I mean, the installation of this dam was meant to was installed for the strict purposes of managing these invasive species, but in that management, there was a lot of ecological and cultural harms that have happened to this area, and it is still important for us to ensure that there is quality and responsible invasive species management, because we don't want to see more invasive sea lamprey within our waters, and as well as, you know, we want to protect our waters from other invasive species as well. This will be important for cultural revitalization. So we don't just want to restore the aquatic ecosystem, but we also want to restore the cultural ecosystem. Those seasonal harvesting traditions, those ceremonies that haven't been done here for multiple generations, we have to teach that teach those traditions and ceremonies to our community and to our younger generations, so we know about our history and we know how to continue those practices. We're also fulfilling our land stewardship obligations. Garden River First Nation is a big fishing community. We exist where we are today with the thanks to the endless amounts of fish that has been provided to our community and to our ancestors. And now we have the option and the power to restore this fish passage, to say thank you and miigwech to the fish that have always supported our community. And we can now support those fish by bringing them back to their traditional spawning habitats and spawning grounds. So yeah, so that's a quick overview of this project that we're working on. I just want to say miigwech to everyone for showing up and listening and learning about this project that we're working on. And also want to say miigwech to a lot of our collaborators who are very interested in this work and want to support this work, including the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, the DFO, the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, and the Anishinaabe Ontario Fisheries Resource Center. One thing to note here as well, this is just very recent news as of just last week, but our community is now seeking to partner with the local land trust organization to purchase the property that this Lamprey Barrier Dam is located on. We have an opportunity to purchase 1,000 acres that surrounds this river and this barrier dam. We are planning on turning that into this region's first Indigenous protected and conservation area. So I'm really happy to share that exciting news with everyone. And yeah, I'll pass it over to anyone who might have any questions. Miigwech.